The rain had been falling for 3 hours when Tamsin Dunmore made the worst decision of her life. Or, the best one. She wouldn't know which for some time yet. The coaching station at Harrow's Crossing was a miserable place even in good weather. In a downpour like this, with the wind tearing sideways and the lanterns swinging like drowning things, it was the kind of place that made a woman question every choice that had led her here. Tamsin had one bag. A leather satchel packed with dried lavender, comfrey root, willow bark, 3 tincture bottles wrapped in cloth, and a change of clothes rolled tight beneath everything else. She had 11 coins and no plan beyond getting as far from Dunmore Hall as the road would take her before her uncle realized she was gone. She had left at dawn. The betrothal documents unsigned on her writing desk where Haskell Dunmore had left them with the quiet instruction that they would be signed by breakfast or she would be locked in the cellar until she reconsidered. Tamsin had reconsidered the entire arrangement, the house, the life, and she had packed her satchel in the dark and climbed out the kitchen window and walked 6 miles to reach the coaching road. Now she was here, soaked through, shaking and about to miss the last coach north. "Final boarding!" the station master called from under the awning. "Carriage 1, Thornfield. Carriage 2, the Northern Pass. If you're not on, you're waiting till Thursday." Thursday was 4 days away. 4 days in a coaching station with no money for a room, and her uncle's men probably already riding after her. Tamsin ran. The rain hit her face like cold needles. 2 carriages stood side by side in the yard, almost identical in the downpour, their lanterns casting smeared circles of amber light through the sheets of water. She couldn't see the markings. She grabbed the handle of the nearest door, wrenched it open, and threw herself inside. Warmth, dry air, the smell of good leather and something else, something clean and sharp, like pine resin and the cold bite of open sky after a storm. The carriage was larger than she expected, the seats dark and well padded, a single lantern casting the interior in soft gold light. There was also a man. He sat across from her in the far corner of the carriage, one leg crossed over the other, a book open across his knee. His hair was charcoal black, cropped close at the sides, and longer on top in a way that looked deliberate and slightly windswept, as though he had been outside recently and hadn't bothered to fix it. His jaw was sharp, were large and careful, rested on the "were large and careful," rested on the pages of his book, as though he had stopped mid-sentence when she burst through the door. His eyes lifted to hers, deep teal, not blue, not green, but something in between, the color of the sea where it runs over dark stone. They were steady and watchful, and they moved across her face, with an attention that made her stomach tighten. "I entered the wrong carriage," Tamsin stammered. She was dripping on his floor. Rain ran down her braid and pooled in the folds of her cloak, and she could feel herself shaking, not just from the cold, but from something else. Something that had started the moment those teal eyes found hers. A low vibration had begun in her chest. Not her heartbeat. Deeper, like a note struck on an instrument she couldn't see, resonating through her ribs and down into her stomach, and out along her arms to the tips of her fingers. It was unsettling. It was also, she realized with a distant kind of alarm, the steadiest she had felt in weeks. The man closed his book, set it on the seat beside him, reached past her, his arm brushing close enough to her shoulder that the vibration in her chest intensified into something almost musical, and pulled the carriage door shut. Then he turned the lock. The click was small and precise, and it landed in the silence between them like a stone dropped into still water. "You belong here," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, the kind of voice that expected to be listened to, not because it demanded attention, but because it rarely wasted words. There was something underneath it, a texture, like the grain in dark wood, that made the space inside the carriage feel smaller than it was. Tamsin pressed her back against the door. "I don't know you." "No." He studied her, The lantern light caught the copper clasps of his coat and threw small reflections across the padded ceiling. But you're running from something. You're soaked through. And the carriage you're looking for is already gone. It pulled out 2 minutes ago. Her stomach dropped. She turned and wiped the fogged window with her sleeve and looked out into the rain and saw that he was right. One carriage remained in the yard. This one. The other space was empty. Just wheel ruts filling with muddy water and the station master retreating under the awning. "This is the Northern Pass coach?" she asked. "This is a private carriage." He paused. "Heading north." Private, which meant expensive. Which meant this man was either very wealthy or very powerful or both, and Tamsin was locked inside his carriage with rain in her boots, and 11 coins and no way to get out without going back to the station and waiting 4 days for her uncle to find her. "I can't pay for a private carriage." "I didn't ask you to." "Then what do you want?" Something shifted in his expression. Those teal eyes moved across her face again, slower this time, and the vibration in Tamsin's chest deepened into a hum that she could almost hear, low and warm and resonant, like the first note of a song she had known once and forgotten. His gaze dropped to her hands, which were gripping her satchel so tightly the leather creaked. "Company," he said. "It's a long road through the ashwood. I could use someone to talk to." He reached beneath his seat and produced a folded wool blanket, dark gray, thick and dry. He held it out to her. "Lorcan. Lorcan Trevane." She took the blanket. Their fingers brushed. The hum in her chest swelled, not painfully but with the sudden, disorienting clarity of a tuning fork struck against bone. The whole carriage seemed to resonate with it. The walls, the seat beneath her, the rain on the roof settling into a rhythm that matched the vibration exactly. Tamsin gasped. Lorcan's hand tightened on the edge of the blanket just for a moment, and something passed behind his eyes that he shuddered before she could read it. "Tamsin," she managed. "Tamsin Dunmore." The carriage lurched forward. The horses found their stride. The coaching station at Harrow's Crossing fell away behind them, and the forest swallowed the road whole. For the first hour they did not talk. Tamsin wrapped herself in the blanket and pressed into the corner of her seat and tried to stop shaking. The vibration hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled into a constant low frequency that pulsed gently in time with some rhythm she couldn't identify. When Lorcan shifted, the hum intensified. When he was still, it quieted to something almost soothing. He read, or pretended to. She noticed he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. "Apothecary?" he asked without looking up. She startled. "What?" He nodded toward her satchel, which had fallen open slightly, revealing the herbs and tincture bottles. "Comfrey root, willow bark, lavender dried within the last week. Either you're an apothecary or you've robbed one." Despite everything, the corner of her mouth twitched. "Apothecary. My uncle considered it an unsuitable occupation for a woman of my family's name. And what did your uncle consider suitable? Marriage to a man 3 times my age who smells like tallow and keeps hunting dogs in the parlor." The words came out bitter and sharp. She closed her mouth. "I'm sorry. I don't usually tell strangers my reasons for fleeing." Lorcan set his book down. She caught the title embossed in faded lettering, A Survey of Northern Territorial Law. Not the kind of book a merchant carries for entertainment. "You don't have to apologize for wanting your own life, Tamsin." The way he said her name. Low, deliberate, as if the syllables mattered. The hum in her chest flared, and for a moment the rain on the roof and the creak of the carriage wheels and the wind in the trees all seemed to tune themselves to the same frequency, as if the whole world had found a note and was holding it. She pulled the blanket tighter. "What about you? What takes a man with a private carriage and a book on territorial law through the ashwood in a storm?" A pause. Something careful moved behind his expression. "A summit. In the Northern Territories, there are disputes to be settled, borders to be redrawn." He looked at her steadily. "I'm expected." "Expected by whom?" "Everyone. unfortunately. There was a heaviness beneath the dry delivery that she recognized, not arrogance, weariness, the particular exhaustion of someone who was always required and rarely wanted. She understood that more than she wished to. "There's a coaching inn at the halfway point," he said. "We'll stop for the horses. You can warm up, eat. If you want to continue north, you're welcome to stay. If you want to go your own way, I won't stop you." "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her for a long moment. The lantern swung gently, the light catching his jaw and the teal of his eyes, which were not cold, she realized. They were deep. "Because someone should," he said simply. The coaching inn was called the Wren and Fallow. By the time the carriage rolled to a stop, Tamsin's clothes had dried to damp, and the shaking had stopped entirely. The hum had become something she was almost accustomed to. Almost. It still surged when Lorcan offered his hand to help her down, his grip warm and firm and the resonance so strong that her vision blurred for a half-second before snapping back into focus. He noticed. She saw it in the slight tightening of his jaw. Inside, the inn was warm and smelled of bread and wood smoke. Within minutes, there was a table near the fire and 2 bowls of stew and bread still warm from the oven. "Your uncle," he said between bites. "The betrothal. Is it legally binding?" "Not yet. I didn't sign." She tore a piece of bread. "But Haskell Dunmore doesn't care much about legality. He cares about what he can enforce. And if someone with more authority than your uncle declared the betrothal void?" She looked at him sharply. "Who would do that? A territorial magistrate might, but Haskell has connections in every court between here and the coast. No magistrate in the Southern Territories would rule against him." "I wasn't thinking of a magistrate." The way he said it, the quiet certainty, the weight of a man who is accustomed to his word being sufficient. "Who are you?" "Lorcan." Before he could answer, the inn door opened. "We're hard amber," the flat color of a "we're hard amber," the flat color of a predator's gaze. And they swept the room with practiced efficiency. Those amber eyes found Lorcan. "There you are." The man's voice was clipped. "You weren't supposed to stop here. The schedule has you arriving at the northern outpost by dawn." "The horses needed rest, Gage." Lorcan's voice had changed. Harder. "And I decide the schedule." Gage looked at Tamsin for the first time. His hard amber eyes moved over her with thorough, immediate dismissal. "Who is this?" "A guest." "You don't take guests. Not on this road, not tonight." Gage stepped closer. Captain's bars caught the firelight, gold on black. "My lord, the northern pass is not safe after dark. We should have traveled with the full escort." "My lord." Tamsin went very still. Lorcan's jaw set. "The full escort would have drawn attention I specifically wanted to avoid, Captain Whitmore. And yet here we are, at an inn, with a stranger." Gage glanced at Tamsin again. "She should be put off here." "No." The word was quiet and absolute. Gage held Lorcan's gaze for 3 seconds. Then he inclined his head and walked back out into the rain. "My lord," Tamsin said softly. Lorcan looked at her. The weariness was back. "My name is Lorcan Trevane," he said. "And I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories." The hum in her chest had already told her something her mind was only now catching up to. He was not an ordinary man. The vibration between them was not an ordinary thing. And the way he was looking at her, steady and open and more vulnerable than a king had any right to be, told her that he knew it too. "How long have you known?" she asked. "About this? About whatever this is between us?" "Since you touched the blanket." His voice was rough. The resonance. The elders call it the deep chord. It happens when 2 people are so fundamentally matched that their bodies recognize each other before their minds do. Like instruments tuned to the same pitch. He paused. "I felt it the moment you opened the door. And you locked me in. I didn't want you to run before I could understand what was happening." He leaned forward. The firelight caught his face, and his eyes were so deep and so steady that she felt the resonance between them tighten like a string being drawn taut. "I will never lock a door you want open, Tamsin. Tell me to unlock it, and I will. Tell me to let you go, and I will do that too. But I need you to know that what you felt in that carriage is real, and I felt it too. And I have never felt anything like it in my life." The inn was quiet. The rain hammered the roof. The fire burned low and steady. Tamsin looked at the Alpha King sitting across from her in a roadside inn with stew on the table and rain in the creases of his coat, and an expression on his face that was not commanding, not regal, not anything she had been taught to expect from the most powerful man in the territories. It was open. It was honest. It was asking. She reached across the table and took his hand. The chord struck. Not gently. It resonated through them both like a bell rung in a cathedral, deep and full and shaking, and the room seemed to vibrate with it, the glasses on the shelf trembling, the fire leaping, the rain on the roof finding a rhythm that matched exactly the frequency humming between their joined hands. Lorcan's breath caught. His fingers closed around hers and his eyes went bright and fierce, and she could feel him, not just his hand, but him. The steadiness and the weight and the loneliness he carried like armor, and the part of him that was already reaching for her, the way a root reaches for water in dry ground. "We should go," she whispered, "before your captain decides I'm a threat to national security." Something broke across his face. Not quite a smile. Warmer. "He already has. I heard him muttering about it while saddling his horse." They left the inn. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Gage was mounted and waiting in the yard, his hard amber eyes tracking Tamsin as she climbed back into the carriage. Lorcan paused at the door. "She stays, Gage." "My lord, I strongly advise against it." "She stays." The carriage moved on. The road narrowed. The trees leaned in. 2 miles from the border outpost, 4 men stepped from the tree line with weapons drawn, their movements coordinated with the precision of soldiers who had rehearsed this. The carriage horses screamed and reared. The carriage lurched sideways and Tamsin was thrown against the wall, her tincture bottles shattering, the sharp scent of willow bark and comfrey filling the space. Lorcan moved. Fast. Faster than she expected. He threw the door open and was out of the carriage in one fluid motion, his coat flaring behind him, and through the rain-streaked window Tamsin saw something she would never forget. The shift. Not the full transformation, but enough. His eyes blazed teal bright in the darkness, his shoulders broadened, and his voice, when he spoke, carried a command that was not human. "Stand down." 2 of the 4 attackers dropped their weapons immediately. Instinct. The alpha command in his voice bypassed their training and went straight to the wolf inside them, and they couldn't resist it any more than they could resist breathing. The 3rd stumbled back. The 4th held. The 4th was Gage. Tamsin saw it through the window. Captain Whitmore, his military coat gone, his face uncovered, a blade in his hand, and his hard amber eyes locked on his king with an expression that had nothing to do with loyalty and everything to do with desperation. "You weren't supposed to stop at the inn." Gage's voice was stripped of its professional control. Something raw and cornered remained. The summit would have exposed everything, the ledgers, 3 years of payments from the East March delegation. "I served you faithfully for 7 years, and you never noticed what it cost." "You served yourself." Tamsin opened the carriage door without thinking. The apothecary in her had already assessed the situation. Lorcan was powerful, but Gage was close and the blade was drawn, and the resonance in her chest was screaming with something fiercer than fear. She stepped into the mud and reached into her satchel and found the one bottle that hadn't broken, concentrated valerian and passion flower, and threw it. The bottle hit the ground at Gage's feet and shattered. The concentrated vapor rose in a cloud, sharp and sweet, and Gage staggered back, his eyes watering, the blade dropping from his fingers as the sedative hit his lungs. Lorcan moved in the same instant. He caught Gage's wrist, twisted, and brought the captain to his knees in the mud without striking him. The remaining two attackers dropped. It was over in seconds. Lorcan stood in the rain with his hand still locked around his captain's wrist, and his eyes blazing and his chest heaving, and he looked at Tamsin standing barefoot in the mud, with broken glass in her satchel and sedative vapor in her hair. And something in his expression collapsed. "You threw a bottle of valerian at an armed man. It worked. You could have been hurt. So could you." She was shaking again. The resonance between them was so loud she could hear it, a deep harmonic vibration that made the rain itself seem to hum. "I wasn't going to sit in the carriage and watch." He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been searching for his entire life, and has only just realized he found. His free hand released Gage's wrist. He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, and his hands found her face, wet and cold and trembling, and he held her like she was something that the storm might take if he wasn't careful. "Tamsin." She kissed him. She kissed him standing in the mud on a forest road with rain in her hair and valerian on her hands, and the chord between them struck so deep and so true that the trees shook. The resonance found its full frequency at last, settling into something that was not just a hum anymore, but a song. Steady and grounding and enormous, and his hands were in her hair and his mouth was warm and certain against hers, and the rain fell and neither of them moved. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers. His breathing was ragged. "I should tell you," he murmured, "that I am a very inconvenient person to fall in love with. I should tell you that I threw a bottle of horse sedative at your captain of the guard, and I would do it again." He laughed. The sound was startled and real, and it made him look younger and less like a king, and more like a man who had just been kissed by someone who meant it. The border outpost was 3 miles ahead. They walked the last stretch together, the horses too spooked to pull the carriage, Gage restrained between outriders who had been trailing at a distance. The rain stopped. The moon came out. The outpost appeared on the ridge like a crown of torchlight. Inside, soldiers snapped to attention when Lorcan walked through the door and stared openly at the rain-soaked woman beside him with herb-stained hands and bare feet, and an expression that dared any of them to say a word. None of them did. That night, in the outpost commander's quarters, Lorcan told her everything: the summit, Gage's embezzlement, suspected for months but unprovable until the ledgers were opened. The reason he had traveled without an escort because the only person he had trusted to protect him was the person trying to end him. "And then a woman crashed through my door in a rainstorm," he said quietly. They sat before the fire, close enough that the resonance between them was a steady, warm pulse. "And everything changed. I crashed through the wrong door. You crashed through the right one." He looked at her. The firelight turned his eyes from teal to something deeper, the color of deep water catching flame. "Stay, Tamsin. Not because I'm a king and I'm asking. Because this," he pressed his hand to his chest, "is real, and I am not willing to pretend I don't feel it. I'm an apothecary with 11 coins and no shoes. You're the woman who threw a sedative at a man with a blade to protect someone she'd known for 6 hours. His voice was low and raw. "I don't need you to be anything other than what you are." She looked at him, the Alpha King, sitting in a borrowed room with mud on his coat, asking a runaway apothecary to stay. "I'll stay," she said. He reached for her hand. She gave it. The cord struck, warm and deep, and the fire burned a little brighter, and outside, the forest was quiet, and the road they had traveled stretched back into the dark, like a story that had found its ending. 2 months later, the northern summit concluded with Gage Whitmore stripped of rank and exiled to the eastern marshlands, his co-conspirators dishonorably discharged. The carriage driver received a bonus and a very large bottle of whiskey. Tamsin received a workshop. It was on the ground floor of the northern keep, the room that had once been a storage cellar. Lorcan had ordered the walls whitewashed and the windows enlarged until the morning light poured in like water. And by the time Tamsin walked through the door, there were already bundles of dried lavender hanging from the ceiling, and a copper still in the corner, and a long oak work table that was exactly the right height for someone who stood 5'6" in bare feet. She was standing at that table now, crushing comfrey root with a mortar and pestle, when Lorcan came in. He did this most mornings, appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea and the expression of a man who could not quite believe his luck, and had stopped trying to pretend otherwise. His hair was damp from the baths. His coat was unbuttoned. His teal eyes found hers across the room, and the resonance between them hummed, warm and steady, the deep chord that had become as natural as breathing. The Dunmore petition arrived, he said, setting her tea on the work table. Your uncle is requesting a formal audience to discuss the betrothal. And? I sent back a one-line response informing him that the woman he attempted to sell in an illegal marriage contract is under the protection of the Crown. He picked up a sprig of lavender from the drying rack. I may have also mentioned that locking a grown woman in a cellar is a criminal offense in every territory north of the Ashwood. You're very thorough. I'm very motivated. He stepped closer. The resonance deepened. The mortar and pestle trembled in her hands, not from fear, never again from fear, but from the way proximity to this man made every nerve in her body pay attention. He took the pestle from her hand and set it down and lifted her fingers to his mouth and kissed the herb dust from her knuckles, slow and deliberate, his eyes on hers. You have a territorial summit in an hour, she murmured. I'm the king. They'll wait. He pulled her closer and she went, not because he asked, but because her body recognized him the way a song recognizes its melody, and the chord between them settled into something so deep and steady that the lavender bundles swayed gently in the vibration of it, and the morning light turned the workshop gold, and Tamsin Dunmore, who had climbed out a kitchen window with 11 coins and no plan and thrown herself into the wrong carriage on the worst night of her life, stood in the arms of the man she loved and felt, for the first time in her memory, exactly where she was supposed to be. Outside, the forest stretched green and deep and quiet. Inside, the tea grew cold. Neither of them minded.